So Dad got to South Africa, he moved to East London and started working in the battery industry. He got a company car, a Rambler, that he was very proud of, and he explored every mountain and back road of the Eastern Cape. So Mum and Dad then first met through a mutual friend. Mum was teaching in East London after studying at UCT and spending a few months traveling in Europe. And the way Mum told the story was that the first night that they met, Dad came for dinner at Mum and her friend's flat, and Mum found him incredibly rude and didn't talk to him at all that night. And all of this was because Dad had arrived late, probably from the squash club. But she said there was definitely something about him, and of course they saw each other again. According to Dad, he knew that Mum was the one, and Mum was engaged at the time. But the way Dad tells the story, he took the engagement ring from Mum. He wrote a letter to Mum's fiance and told the fiance that Mum was no longer available because Dad was on the scene. We all think it's very sweet that Dad thought it was so much his decision, because we all know that Mum would have decided what was best for her. And she would have decided that Dad was the better option, thank goodness. From there, I think a roller coaster began. Dad was very ambitious and a very talented businessman, and he decided that they needed to be in Joburg. But first, Dad felt that he would have to get an MBA if he was going to shoot to the top. So they decided to take a year off, and they came down to Cape Town, and Dad did his MBA at the Graduate School of Business. And I can only imagine that this was a really special year for them. Mum was back in Cape Town, she was close to family and friends. Dad was surrounded by academics and learning, and was making friends with like-minded people, some best friends who he talked about always. I suppose what's amazing about that year is that Dad made any friends, because Dad could be very argumentative and impossible when he wanted to be, and his very high intelligence didn't help with that. So I've heard from one of his good MBA friends that there was many a lecture that was interrupted by a question, or more often just an opinion from Kilduff from Ireland. After the MBA, they moved back up to Joburg, and Dad was almost immediately appointed Managing Director of Coty South Africa, and the roller coaster continued. As with any good marriage, there was good times and there was difficult times, and Joburg had its fair share of both. Mum and Dad travelled extensively. They travelled to the US, to Europe, back home to Ireland. Two great kids arrived, but there was also hardship. And I think it was testament to who Mum and Dad were that in the tough times they just got closer. And I can't say it's a testament to Mum, because Dad was as committed, and when times were really tough, he was there at Mum's side. But after a number of years, Joburg was no longer right for Mum and Dad, and they started their slow journey back to Cape Town with a few years in Knysna. When they got back to Cape Town, Sharon and I think a very happy period in Mum's life started. She was back teaching. She was teaching high school. She was at Maitland Hoërskool with Santa. And I think Mum just loved that environment. She loved the challenges of a high school, the faculty, the pupils. So in Mum's career, I think this was a very special time. Dad was keeping himself busy with all sorts of crazy things. He bought a shoe factory. He bought a business brokers. He wrote a book on business, which was published. He lectured for a number of years, and he fought tooth and nail to get Sharon and myself into the right schools and the right colleges. So he was a very busy man. And this Cape Town journey started for us in Kenilworth. We were living in Gloucester Square at the time, and this is where we met Auntie Hill and James and Michael, who are with us online. And very soon our two families became one, what I think in COVID times they would call a bubble. And this just reminded me of something incredible about Mom, which is that wherever she stopped in her life, she made friends forever. People that she would stay in contact with, people that would come and stay with us years later. Mom really had a sincere and genuine interest in the people that she met. And I think that made her a very good friend, and it made the people that she drew to her very good friends. But Ash also reminded me when we were chatting about this that Mom also knew everyone. If you were living in London and you met someone who was from Cape Town, it would only take Mom a couple of seconds to say, yes, I know her aunt, or I know her granny. And as Sharon and I got a bit older, the one that we'd hear the most is, yes, I taught her. So Mum really did know everyone. After Gloucester Square, we moved to Cromwell Road, and this was probably the longest static period of our family. Sharon and I finished our high school at Cromwell Road. We went through university. This was also where Dad landed up in the wheelchair, and we had to move the whole house around. Mum started doing her crafting, and the entire upstairs became a sewing room. So there were very good memories in this house. Steve reminded me the other day that you could get home at Cromwell Road at 1 o'clock in the morning, and Mum's light would still be on, and Mum would still be sewing, and you could sit with her and have a long chat, and by the time you went to bed, Mum was still sewing. Now, Cromwell days was also the period when Steve came onto the scene. And I think it's fair to say this was probably the toughest part of Dad's life. The wheelchair was tough, but Sharon having a serious boyfriend was a close second. I don't even want to think how long it took for Dad to realize that Sharon knew better than Dad who was the right choice for her. But eventually Dad did realize, and even harder to accept was that Steve could bribe better than he could. But after that, a very deep love and respect developed for Dad's other son. The other very meaningful thing that happened in the Cromwell days was that Dad started working with Cheshire Homes. And as much as being the big Joburg MD would have given Dad a thrill, Cheshire was where Dad belonged. He loved the people, he loved the challenges, he made very good friends while he was with Cheshire. And I think as a family, we also say it's possible that it was a blessing, that, you know, as hard as it was for Dad living in a wheelchair, he was making a real difference in people's lives who often had greater challenges than he did. But if I come back to the family and just a couple more memories, at this time I was still living up in Joburg and Ash was on the scene, and I think Steve had very much broken the folks in for Ash, so her experience was a bit easier. She found in-laws who welcomed her like a member of the family, and I think it was more Ash who had to get used to us lot. I remember her sitting at those first few dinners at Cromwell Road and listening to Dad argue about something that he probably didn't even agree with. He just loved a good argument. And she would talk to Mom about books and realized it was very difficult to keep up with the amount of books that Mom would read. And this reminds me of another wonderful memory of Mom and Dad, which was listening to them talking about their love of books. It would normally start with Dad saying, in so-and-so book, there's a beautiful passage that goes like this. And Mum would then sit and think and say, no, it doesn't. You've got the wrong book. Of course, now himself would have Sharon and I running around trying to find the book for him, because when Dad had something stuck in his head, he was single-minded. We'd find the book, we'd bring it to him, he'd find the passage, and of course Mom was right. Mom wouldn't wait too long for an apology. Dad would make a joke, and he'd then open the book, and he'd spend the rest of the day reading it to Mom. They really shared an incredible passion for books, but it was more than that. It was for the classics, for real literature and for poetry. They shared a deep love for music, with Dad always shouting, "Turn it up!" and Mom always worried about the neighbors. A passion for theatre, for beautiful art, beautiful furniture, and a very deep love for gardening, where I think some epic battles happened. And on top of all of this, they were generous to a fault. Dad was always wanting to buy Sharon and myself and our cousins expensive gifts for our birthday. Always wanting to slip the grandkids a little bit of cash for their school holidays or for their birthdays. Always buying steak for every braai. And through all of this, Mom would moan and moan that they didn't have money for Dad's generosity. But she was no different, generous to a fault. And she also loved a bit of steak on the braai. And this, of course, brings us to their mutual love for their grandkids. Dad and his grandkids. Mom was determined to raise the grandkids the right way. Once or twice when I said to Mom, I think Sharon knows how to raise her kids. Mom would say to me, it takes a village to raise a child. Mom wanted to teach them and to guide them and to love them, but the right way. Whereas Dad was just determined to cause as much trouble as he could with them. If his NBA mates were his intellectual soulmates, I think his grandkids were his besties. He just couldn't get enough of them. So I'm going to end off with that memory. I think Steve will talk a little bit more about the grandkids. But I just want to thank you for sharing these memories with us and for celebrating two very special lives and two people who loved each other very much. And we will miss them.